Thank you.
Might I go back to the question before last on that in fact whether the public open space of squares and gardens were treated the same. They may be in our particular social and community facilities listing, but when you're actually trying to get railings, you only get a contribution towards assistance if the open space is actually open to the public. Some of the private gardens would like railings, but don't raise the money themselves, and there's not much help outside. So that's the only difference between the privately owned gardens, as far as I know.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was wondering whether we could have something spelling out childcare and children's centres as community facilities, because at the moment they're kind of hidden within either point A or B, and they're not really spelt out.
Okay, thank you. Right, were there any other points? Oh, yes.
I'm not sure, but if you've got the new developments that are happening in Westminster and they're privately funded and they're offering community stuff, such as maybe gyms or community halls, how does that fit with, because it's privately funded, it's different to the first, was it the Fitness First? Because they're funding it and saying it's going to be offered. And one of the things that's come from sort of residents is saying, well, will it be affordable and is it for the community? So I'm not sure if it's where that sits within, the two definitions.
Something like Fitness First, or?
Well, no, if you're talking about the developments, let's just say, I don't know, Chelsea Barracks, if they were going to put a sports facility in and a community hall and lots of other stuff, will it be affordable to, like social housing and things? But because it's publicly and different money's going into it, how does that fit in? Does that make sense? Yeah.
So certainly in terms of things that we secure through Section 106, there would need to be making sure that they don't automatically go into the private definition of social and community. Right, thank you. And the lady on the end. Yes. Did you want to? Yep.
I was just going to make the point. I think one of the key differences between the private and public community facilities, often the private facilities often have a much more cash rich, especially in terms of things like Fitness First and higher educational establishments, which aren't often open to the local community because their participation is based upon having the money to participate or having the grades to obtain a place. And I just think we need to be careful, especially if a public community facility becomes vacant, whether it's re-provided elsewhere or just leaves the premises, that those facilities aren't, as a first step, made available to private community facilities, but you're actually trying to seek reuse for public, because obviously often private facilities can compete in the open market and they don't need a positive policy approach to actually aid them in obtaining sites and properties.
Okay, so that's quite an interesting point, I guess, to explore in terms of how a policy approach could work, because obviously if it falls within a use class, for example, a leisure facility at the moment, Fitness First is such an easy example, so I'm not picking on them, it's just something that everybody knows about. But, for example, if they wanted to use a space that was, formerly the Queen Mother Centre, for instance, if they wanted to get rid of that, just as an example, is under the policy and under the legislation, it would be difficult to control that change of ownership and change of who actually occupies the space. So I think any ideas that anybody from the floor could put forward about that, because planning doesn't usually control the occupier. It certainly can when you secure something through Section 106, but in terms of existing facilities, you can't normally do those things in hindsight. So whether there's any suggestions, yeah.
I suppose the example of the Mobley Sports Centre, for example, if that became vacant, it would seem wrong to not allow a change of use for an alternative purpose if you could show that there was no public demand, but actually give the site for a lower market value to, say, Fitness First, simply because you weren't allowing a change of use. They're a commercial facility, they charge a lot for ownership, and it doesn't seem to be right that you would protect the site and not allow it to change use to alternative purposes, simply because you were protecting it for a community use, which isn't really available to the whole community because it's based upon access and money.
So certainly in our protection policy, and we come on to it later when we look at sort of marketing terms and arrangements that you might use to demonstrate with what it should be allowed, we'd have to be very careful on that point.
Yeah, I think so, and certainly higher education establishments as well, because they really are, you know, the basis of them in the community of Westminster is quite a vague one, because although they have employment benefits, obviously so do retail establishments and offices, and the actual benefit they have to Westminster residents is certainly open to question.
Okay, thank you. Councillor.
In relation to that, though, insofar as they now have any kind, or any part of them has charitable status because of the public benefit, that would offer, strengthen the ability of the council to require them to provide, to demonstrate that, wouldn't it?
I think we'd have to look at a case-by-case basis, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the use classes order for you. It's within a use classes order. You can change freely between occupier, providing it's for the same use class. So whether it's a public or private occupier, we wouldn't have control over unless it had been specifically agreed through a planning permission. So, yes.
All these facilities, they can be accessible by residents and workers. As Westminster is a very diverse community, what about the immigrants? Can they access, to all these facilities that we just talked about?
I think we would be looking for your guidance on whether or not you've got any concerns in that respect, or whether or not you've got any understanding that there's instances where they can't access.
Well, I can't see any policy. I haven't come across any policy specifically on looking after the immigrants in this area. So perhaps, the meeting tonight, we can talk about it.
Thank you very much.